about the Mexican-American experience in Texas. It's going to go through the history of segregation, racism. It even says on the title, I guess I'll read the whole title to you first. I'm going to read a little snippet. This is the Mexican-American experience in Texas, citizenship, segregation, and the struggle for equality. And this is by author Marthamenchaca. And it's one of the really awesome books that I picked up from University of Texas Press. I picked this up like about a year or two ago at the San Antonio Book Festival that we have here at our San Antonio Public Library downtown, the big enchilada red building. And so thanks so much for joining. This is going to be the Mexican-American experience in Texas. I think it's really prevalent. It's a prevalent experience that people are going through. It's a struggle that people are going through right now. It's a very contentious point, especially here in Texas. Man, I have so many freckles and you can see them all in this light. I'm apologizing in advance if I look like a little leopard. So yeah, I really do appreciate you being here. For the record, I'm Mexican American. I did have a couple grandparents immigrate here. My family has been migrant farm workers, so this issue of immigration is important to me, and it should be important to you because Mexican Americans worked really, really hard and still work very, very hard to and are the backbone and foundation of this nation, as well as African Americans, obviously, and so and goes without saying Native Americans, right? But I will say it because it's important. And so we are the backbone of this foundation. So Black, Indigenous people of color need to be represented more, and I think this book goes into the history behind that. Obviously, it was France. Obviously it was the Native Americans, and then France came, and then Spain came, and then Mexico was established, and then the Republic of Texas, and then obviously the United States, right? And so I was actually listening to Texas Public Radio, and they were talking about how there are nationalists here in Texas who are trying to get Texas to secede from the Union, so to secede from the United States and become its own country. And that the governor or whoever's in office, sorry, probably not the governor, but they didn't get enough, apparently, votes on their proposal or their protest, and so they had a proposition that people were signing. They got several thousand votes, over several 100,000 votes. I think they said 146, 176, basically almost 200,000 votes, I remember. And that they were denied the claim, and this is recently, this is like this year, that they want us to have a option on the ballot in March, I believe is what they were saying, about us becoming our own country and seceding from the United States. And so it's a scary time, frankly. And there's a lot of things going on here in Texas, especially. They're flying immigrants out to other states, and it was really interesting to hear Trevor Noah speaking to Mayor Karen Bass, and how they were talking about how Republican states will fly immigrants into, like, say, New York and like other states like Chicago and things of that nature, and try and destabilize them, especially during like election times, and then talk about, they'll talk about job rates and then poverty levels and homeless levels and all of these things, but they're just, it's almost like sabotage is what I interpreted. And so anyways, it's a really, really great podcast, What Now, by Trevor Noah. I've actually not listened to too many, so don't question me about it. I'm just from memory. That's what I'm talking about. But it is a very contentious point right now, immigration. And Texas is one of the largest, if not the largest, besides California, state in the United States. And so what we do, so goes the United States. Okay, so whatever you feel about that, I thought it would be really important to do a Reading Rage live, and I really love UT's press. I'm hoping that one day, if I submit a book of poetry, they would consider it. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, obviously, because I feel like it's an important book that you should get your hands on, and I was lucky enough to get it. And so it was the University of Texas Press at Austin, and it was copyright 2022, so it's a fairly new book. This is the first edition, and it's in the Library of Congress. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Margaret Mead, anthropologist. Every moment is an organizing opportunity. Every person a potential activist. Every minute a chance to change the world. Dolores Huerta, United Farm Workers activist. And I know if you've watched any of my videos, I've already done a little short synopsis on Dolores Huerta and when she started organizing. And that was a Latino Leaders book that I got from work. And so if you go down on my page, you'll see one of my videos was about Dolores. And then the last quote here is, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't after you. And that's by Joseph Heller, the novelist. And I think that with AI and algorithms and binary ones and zeros and all of the security and connection that Google does with all of our apps across our phones and our computers and our TVs and our smart this and our Echo that and our Dot this and our Alexa that, it's very, very easy to just pick up, certain words from what we're saying, and I don't know how that works. I'm not a computer guru, so don't ask me, but I think those three are very good quotes to start the book. And then before I continue, I just wanted to thank Sturgill Simpson for the tunes. He's here in my apartment playing just for you and me. No, I have a record on. I got a vinyl from Hogwild, and this was like a long time ago, like very long time ago, that I got it, but I love it. And I first heard about Sturgill Simpson because I was watching his Netflix special, his music video album that he has on Netflix, and it has to do with a lot of corporate greed and aftermath of what will happen to us, if we let these people take advantage of us and continue to try and trample on the minorities here in the United States and across the globe. And so his representation of how citizens uniting and people trying to fight the good fight, how important that is. And that's just a brief synopsis. Go watch it. It's on Netflix. I freaking love it. And so this is one of his albums. It's actually like a blue album with like white streaks and specks going through it. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's called, where did I put the, anyways, I'm not gonna get it, but, okay, so, I will go through. This book offers a historical overview of Mexican Americans' social and economic experiences in Texas from the Spanish period to the present. My aim is to focus on the political struggles that Mexican Americans faced in their pursuit of equal rights after Texas joined the United States. As I develop this narrative, I examine major turning points in the advancement, denial, or reversal of their civil rights quest by revisiting events that had statewide impact on their lives. The narrative begins with the settlement of Texas during the Spanish and Mexican periods because it is necessary to look at who initially colonized the territory and how their ancestry influenced their incorporation into U.S. society. Spanish and Mexican census records indicate that most settlers were a racially mixed group of Indian, Spanish, and African descent, and that they were governed by a numerically small, elite white population. I argue that the mixed racial heritage of the Mexican American population affected the types of opportunities they were extended by Texas governments after independence. In 1836, Anglo-American immigrants who had settled in Texas broke away from Mexico and established the Republic of Texas. A few years later, Texas was annexed by the United States. Over the generations, and until the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Mexican Americans remained an ethnic minority population distinguished by their ancestral origin and mixed racial heritage. Treated as second-class citizens, they were not extended the political rights and social privileges enjoyed by Anglo-Americans. The two main political struggles that Mexican Americans endured were how to assert their legal rights of citizenship and how to retain possession of their Spanish and Mexican land grants. Land and citizenship were interrelated social issues. If Mexican Americans were denied citizenship, their legal rights over property could be nullified. Okay, so I want to stop right there, and I know I just started reading, but I wanted to stop and talk about what they were talking about right there. What author Menchaca was talking about. And so Martha is like talking about the Spanish and Mexican land grants. And so that's so important, and I'm sure you've heard about it, and if you haven't, I just know a little bit. And so I was discussing when Flea was doing his book club before he released his book, Acid for the Children, he was doing a book club. And one of his books that he had everybody read and then he reviewed was News Around the World. Oh my god, I did a review on it. But basically it's about the land grants that people had to... It just briefly touched on it, but how in order to keep their land, people had to travel outside of the United States to get their title, right? Their land title, and to bring it and verify that their land was their land. Otherwise, Texas would take away people's land. They would be like, well, I don't care that you're here. We're going to give it to somebody else. And so what they made it even harder for Mexicans. Is not only was it like, I think it was first in Monterrey where they had to go, maybe, but somewhere along the border, right? Like very close. I mean, not close for back then when you're in a wagon, you know what I mean, or traveling by horse and buggy, but closer. Then they did it to like CDMX, I'm pretty sure, to the Ciudad de Mexico, to DF, right? So like they, somebody corrected me recently, and they said that DF is no longer called that. I think they're saying that it's CDMX now, like Ciudad de Mexico, I'm assuming. And so basically they moved it even farther for people to have to travel. And I mean traveling through dangerous roads, traveling with your family or not. I mean, like, this was extremely dangerous to make that sort of travel that it could take many months to make that trip over and back, and then having to make sure you get the paperwork, talk to the people that are there, and they're not even, it's like taxation without representation. You know what I mean? Like, you have to go somewhere else to go get your title to maintain land that has been in your family for decades and decades and decades and generations. So Texas and Mexico made it so hard for people to maintain their land rights. And so that's like one form of prejudice and institutional prejudice that they did against Mexican Americans and obviously and Native Americans, right, that had their land. And so that's just really interesting. And I think that even though it's a small passage, it's a small sentence about land rights, there's so, well, there, it goes on, right? But that little sentence about land rights really has such a history behind it. And I only know a little bit, but that's a little synopsis for you. And so basically, land and citizenship were interrelated social issues. If Mexican Americans were denied citizenship, and legal rights over property could be nullified. So not only if they have their title, they have to become citizens, they have to do all these things as the government's changing hands all the time, right? Around that time. And so by the turn of the century, the fact that they were U.S. citizens was no longer being questioned. Unfortunately, they continued to be treated as second-class citizens, subjugated to legal and social segregation. Under U.S. law at the time, segregation was not seen as a violation of a person's constitutional rights. The U.S. Supreme Court, it's called the Slaughterhouse Cases, in 1873, and in subsequent decisions ruled that state legislatures had the authority to determine what actions could be considered a violation of a person's civil rights. In Texas, it was not illegal to segregate Mexican Americans and African Americans from white people in public accommodations. I'm sure we've all seen those signs that say, no blacks, no Mexicans, no dogs. And it's just like, oh, okay. Those signs were real. And I had family say that when they were migrant farm workers, they couldn't go into certain restaurants. They had to go to the back door, order food, and then they would go and eat at a park. Like, it's during my family's lifetime. So this segregation it's still happening. It's not gone. It's here. We have people that can testify and give testimonials now. In Texas, it was not illegal to segregate Mexican Americans and African Americans from white people in public accommodations. The first exclusion law affecting Mexican Americans was affirmed by the Texas Supreme Court in 1885 and in 1907. You know what I can say to that? To those people. And such laws were expanded by the Texas legislature to cover all forms of public accommodation. Allegedly, the intent of Texas's exclusion laws was to protect citizens' rights to operate their establishments as they pleased. This reminds me of people being able to deny service to people that are in the LGBTQ plus communities. So, by law, business owners and members of organizations and clubs could exclude any person from the U.S. of their facilities or confine patrons to restricted areas. The outcome of Texas's exclusion laws led many white residents to intentionally embarrass, mock, and deny services to Mexican Americans and African Americans. From the 1920s to the mid-1950s, the Texas legislature passed additional laws to separate Mexican Americans and African Americans from Anglo-Americans in residential districts and schools. Zoning laws, home rule authority, language policies, housing covenants, and cultural backgrounds were used to implement this separation. So just to echo that ever so quickly, a nonprofit I worked at that I really loved and am still very impressed by their work was the San Antonio Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. They brought in a special presentation given to our board of directors during one of our board meetings, showing how there were literally in in neighborhood association contracts here in San Antonio clauses that denied Mexican Americans and African Americans from ever being able to move into those neighborhoods. It was rich neighborhoods, or just neighborhoods that they have in contract in writing that we have record of, that they would not allow Mexican Americans and African Americans to move into those neighborhoods. I mean, that's why we see pockets of where minorities settled, right? And that you can see the segregation in our neighborhoods. And so yeah. In the late 1920s, Mexican American parents in Del Rio, Texas, challenged the unfair treatment of their children in the towns of Mexican schools. After a series of confrontations over school finances, the parents sued the local school board, and in 1930 their lawsuit reached the Texas Appellate Court in San Antonio. The judges ruled that the separating students by ethnicity and race did not violate state law. In Independent School District versus Salvatierra, the court upheld the right of school boards to segregate Mexican students. Mexican Americans nonetheless repeatedly challenged segregation laws and policies by appealing to the courts or to the governor's office. Unfortunately, the court system continued to affirm that Texas exclusion laws did not violate federal or state laws. See, for example, Terrell Wells Swimming Pool versus Rodriguez in 1944. By the end of World War II, LULAC and the American GI Forum had emerged as the leading American civil rights organizations challenging the legal basis for segregating Mexican Americans. During the late 1940s, fighting the state's exclusion laws, particularly regarding education, continued to be the main political struggle of Mexican Americans. Many Mexican schools did not offer a curriculum above the 4th or 6th grade, and this prevented Mexican American students from receiving the education necessary to qualify for high school admission. Because civil rights activists identified school segregation as the most severe problem affecting the social mobility of Mexican Americans, I provide an overview of the main cases that challenged Texas laws and eventually led to school reform. And so that's just to pause there. Right now in San Antonio, they're closing, I think it's 19 schools in SAISD, in San Antonio Independent School District. 19 schools. And there are different opinions, and I am not in the school district, and I am not a teacher in the school district, nor do I have the know of I'm not in the know. I don't know exactly if this is good, if this is bad. I think it's bad. I mean, I don't have any points ready, but it's something of interest to know that taxes come from the community and they go to these schools. And if HOAs and neighborhood associations early on discriminated against the intermingling and the settling of different races, then we're going to have naturally poorer and more minority populations that are denied jobs and moving into richer neighborhoods. Those people are going to, because of being excluded, are not going to have as much generational wealth, right? No brainer. So now these schools are not getting as many, they've always not gotten as many resources. They don't have as much money flowing into their campuses because it's their neighborhood that is affecting that school and the resources that they're getting. And so now they're all closing. And it's just really sad. And we can see how the history has built up to this moment and culminated to what we're at right now. Anyways, so that's happening here in San Antonio. And I know that, just final comment, I know that people are saying, well, okay, we can't change the past, right? We can only concentrate on what's happening now. Everything's culminated to this moment. So what can we do now to save the schools that we have? How can we get resources to the people that need it now? And their idea is, if we close more schools, which obviously are in the poorer neighborhoods, or more middle to low income neighborhoods, if we consolidate our students and move our teachers, then potentially we'll be able to give more resources since we have fewer schools, I think is one point that someone said. And I mean, I think it's really difficult when people are used to having to have their kids walk to school or walk them to school, and then they have to be at work and they work several jobs, and it's just, I don't know. I think there's pros and cons, what people have said, and I'm no authority on the subject. I have been casually perusing the news about it, but I know I was a bit distressed when I heard that we were closing so many schools. I mean, like, almost 20 schools? That's insane. I mean, I could understand, like, maybe 5, 4 or 5, max 10. I don't even know, but not even that much, right? 8, but 19. I don't know. Anyways, like I said, I'm no authority in the subject. Who am I to say? Because civil rights activists identified school segregation as the most severe problem affecting the social mobility of Mexican Americans, I provide an overview of the main cases that challenged Texas laws and eventually led to school reform. Of particular significance was the milestone legal victory against school segregation in 1948, an effort headed by Gustavo Gus Garcia, who worked with Dr. George I. Sanchez and other LULAC and GI Forum activists. In Delgado versus Bastrop Independent School District, Garcia was able to prove that Mexican American students were being segregated on account of their ethnicity, and that this policy violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Fourth Amendment, because no federal or state law required this separation. Judge Ben Rice instated a statewide order requiring Texas schools attended by white and Mexican American students to be desegregated within 1 year. Thank you, Judge Ben Rice. But the state legislature disregarded the judge's mandate and continued to segregate and underfund Mexican schools. Maybe it's because his last name was Rice, because we all eat rice all the time. Just kidding. That was a terrible dad joke, and it didn't even go over well. I'm sorry. But yes, thank you, Judge Ben Rice, for trying. The disassembling of Texas exclusion laws began in the post-World War II era, when national social movements to desegregate the United States were launched by minority groups and liberal whites. Thank you, allies. President Harry S. Truman ordered the desegregation of the armed forces in 1948, a time when Congress and most state legislatures did not support such a change. Nonetheless, civil rights activists across the nation, including those in Texas, continued their quest for equality. By the mid-1960s, the civil rights movement had strengthened, gaining massive national support and influencing many Americans to work toward dismantling segregation and other prejudicial practices. Civil rights advocates place substantial political pressure on the federal government to set up a legal framework and a system of financial penalties to stop state governments from enforcing discriminatory laws against racial minorities. In Texas, the legislature initially refused to implement the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Big surprise there. Which President Lyndon B. Johnson had signed into law. Consequently, Mexican Americans and African Americans collectively placed pressure on the legislature to begin dismantling segregation. In 1967, Mexican American youth in Texas, working together with civil rights activists across the Southwest, took the lead in challenging social inequities affecting their communities. The collective agenda and organizational activities came to be known as the Chicano movement. Mayo, M-A-Y-O, Mayo, whatever, Mayo. It stands for the Mexican American Youth Organization, and La Raza Unida Party, R-U-P. An official third party, became the leading organizations representing the Chicano movement in Texas. Heck yeah, BB. Okay, we just have 2 and a third more page, okay? And then I will let you go because you're probably bored. No, I'm just kidding. You're welcome for my antics. In 1967, Governor John Connally acknowledged that many Texas laws were in violation of the Civil Rights Act, and he asked the Texas legislature to begin desegregating the state. Within a few months, the governor's call, all state buildings except schools were desegregated? Except schools? What? Furthermore, all policies that used race, ethnicity, national origin, or religion to deny people... I lost my place because I was looking at myself. Sorry. Vain heathen over here. Furthermore, all policies that used race, ethnicity, national origin, or religion to deny people the government services were canceled. Neither the governor nor the legislature, however, was prepared to end Texas's exclusion laws affecting the private sector. 2 years later, after a large number of Texans demanded the extension of Civil Rights Act protections to the private sector, segregation theoretically ended. Keyword theoretically. Sadly, many schools remained segregated for another 30 years, and employment mobility for African Americans and Mexican Americans did not make significant progress until the early 1980s. Wow. Sorry, wait, chin. The early 1980s. Literally. Nonetheless, it was a significant change when segregation in public accommodations ended in Texas. Racial discrimination was prohibited by law, and as a result of new laws, a social process began that transformed how space was inhabited. Take up space, y'all. We need to take up space. And so, what I also want to say is that the Civil Rights Act it was, 1964? Right? It didn't really take effect until the early 1980s, so we'll say 20 years later. So think of all the LGBTQ plus laws that we're pushing for, and people are like, well, you already can have marriage legalized. Like that's the only thing that we want and that we need. I mean, and that allies are asking for, and that people that are being othered are asking for. That's not the only thing we're asking for. And it hasn't even been 20 years. Think of how long it takes to enact anything. I think something else that Trevor Noah and Mayor Karen Bass of LA was talking about was that people that are in social movement organizations and are for social equality and social justice, what we've learned is how long it takes for policies and for movements to actually move forward, and how incrementally slow it can be. And so it's not a race, it's a marathon. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen over a year. It's going to happen very slowly. So I will continue. Nonetheless, it was a significant change when segregation in public accommodations ended in Texas. Racial discrimination was prohibited by law, and as a result of new laws, a social process began that transformed how space was inhabited. Race, ethnicity, religion, national origin could no longer be used to determine or regulate the interaction of people of different races and cultures. Shared public places were no longer locations of inequality, where one group was to acquiesce in the demands of allegedly superior others. As the rules of interaction changed in public places, modes of correct social comportment mutated and came to influence the socialization of people's behavior, which, for later generations, culminated in helping many people accept or embrace differences as a fact of life and not a marker of superiority or inferiority. The advancements made in the sharing of public spaces, however, did not end the civil rights struggles facing Mexican Americans. School finance, election redistricting boundaries, the racial profiling are the most serious challenges that Mexican Americans have had to address in the 21st century. These issues became entangled with immigration politics in Texas. They still are, baby. Economic problems in Mexico led to increased immigration to the United States during the early 1980s and the mid-1990s. For many Americans, this was an unwelcome demographic change, and it triggered the formation of social movements to reduce immigration from Mexico, specifically unauthorized migration. In many cities, anti-immigrant sentiments evolved into anti-Latino movements. This book was commissioned by the University of Texas Press as part of the Texas Bookshelf Collection, a work in progress that will include over a dozen books exploring Texas's history and cultures. My charge was to write about the culture and history of Mexican Americans, who are American Americans. My charge was to write about the culture and history of Mexican Americans in Texas from the settlement of the territory to the present. Because of the large scope of the book and the time period to be covered, it became necessary to concentrate on major events shaping the national and statewide experiences of Mexican Americans in Texas. Gosh dang, where am I? I did not want to write an encyclopedia of unrelated accounts about the life of either wealthy Mexican Americans or unsung heroes. My aim, rather, was to write about political and social acts that determined or changed the course of Mexican American history. Specifically, I wanted to understand how Mexican Americans challenged segregation and how their political rights as citizens evolved over time. These two issues were interrelated. Previous research had made me aware of the abundant archival data that were available and, so far, have not been adequately studied. My goal, therefore, was to draw on both the findings of well-known studies and the richness of archival sources to contribute new insights into Texas history. In the area of segregation, I want to better understand how the exclusion of Mexican Americans was justified and masked by governmental officials under the public rationale that Mexicans were discriminated against because of social class differences, not racism. Well, F classism also, man. Of particular significance were the Spanish casta, the legal racial system, census records, which provide indispensable information about Mexican Americans' racial background and reveal how the mestizaje, racial mixture is what that means, process evolved in Texas. Likewise, I wanted to know what Representative Jose Antonio Navarro heard during the Annexation Convention of 1845, when many legislatures were not in favor of extending U.S. citizenship to Mexicans. Equally important, was to study the depositions in Delgado versus Bastrop ISD, 1947 to 1948, in order to understand why Gus Garcia had to ask school district superintendents to explain why they decide to educate Mexican-American students in shacks, while white students were placed in classrooms with modern brick buildings, with indoor bathrooms and water fountains. Compared with the summary accounts found in the published case reports, these depositions contain much more information about the abuse that students underwent. In those depositions, I found that the reason why Garcia passionately dedicated his life to fight for social justice, despite the difficult life he had to lead for challenging savage inequalities. For many years, I had wondered why he took that path when, as a member of the Mexican-American elite, he could have had easily assimilated and used his education to generate income and fund a life of luxury. People like Garcia, who could phenotypically pass for Anglo-American, choose to fight and change Texas's discriminatory laws instead of acquiescing in their imposition in exchange for personal gain. That's called white passing, when someone of a minority, Black, Indigenous, people of color, can pass as a white person. That's what she's talking about. That he could have been white passing, but he decided that he was going to fight anyways for our people. In writing this book, I also wanted to capture the part of the daily life Mexican Americans during the 19th century had. To do so, I found valuable information in legal cases that established state-level precedences defending Mexican Americans' property and civil rights. For example, Antonio de la Garza's and Fernando de Leon's court records review Texas's land grant history. That's what we were talking about. But also, and this is much more noteworthy, give insight into the terror and violence their families experienced when they stood up for their rights and refused to be run out of town. In sum, this is the last paragraph. In sum, I hope that this book will provide valuable insights into the history of Mexican Americans in Texas and illustrate how they fought for equality and to make Texas a place where diversity is appreciated and not feared. These case studies and events are offered to promote critical thinking in hope of dispelling stereotypes and how things came to be in Texas. My aim being to help readers overcome popular beliefs that depict Mexican Americans as foreigners who have not contributed to the betterment and progress of the state. That was the introduction. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to end this because my phone's dying. I hope to continue. I will reach out and make sure that Texas State Press is okay with that. I mean, not Texas State, the University of Texas Press, UT Austin, that they're okay with me reading this. I want to make sure that they're okay. I'm not going to read all of it, but just enough to kind of give you a little brief critical thinking exercise and some history. I think it's important. I love this book, and I already read through that part. I know usually it's my first time reading out loud to you guys, but I wanted to start at the beginning. So, but I've only read like a chapter or two, like the introduction and like the first chapter or something, maybe second. But yeah, I still haven't gotten through the whole book yet, because I just graduated from grad school. So my Cash App and Venmo, if you wanna. Oh, but this not for the reading. Well, I mean, there's not just the reading. I talked about a lot of stuff. Anyways, I don't know if that's allowed. But if you want to give me like a little like, hey, congratulations for graduating, kind of reward. I need it, and it's in the link in my bio. So thanks so much for joining, and I hope you look into some of these issues a little bit more, and please go buy this book, man. It's a wealth of information. It's a lot of research, and she has her sources in there. And so I just wanted to let you know that the sources are there, and she did a lot of research, and you can tell she's well read and well researched, and that's what's really important when it comes to being able to back all of our claims. Thank you so much. Have a great day. I'm alive. I'm alive! And this is my Reading Rage Live. Thanks for joining.